fabulous to have you join us today. And today we are exploring the topic that I'm finding is just a really getting people excited in the HR profession as a new way to view our career development, which is how to be a T-shaped HR professional. So we're going to explore this concept. We're going to give you an opportunity to think about your own T-shape and also how you can use this as a great framework to develop the people in your team and, of course, across your function. And as I said, one of the main reasons we're running this meetup is I've been using this framework with quite a few different teams, and they're just finding it such a useful way to break out of the kind of more traditional way of seeing or viewing HR career development and start to embrace a more dynamic way of developing a more holistic approach to your career. So hopefully you will find it as useful as others. I am joined today by the wonderful Owen Cannon, and I'm going to ask Owen to say a few words of introduction. Over to you, Owen.
Thank you, Natal. The first one is, so I would listen to how Natal said it rather than worry about the spelling. So it's pronounced Owen. I'm originally Irish, but have lived in the UK for a long time and now in the Netherlands. I am an agile coach and facilitator with Natal and with various companies. And my background is actually, before I worked in HR for a little while, and have done HR topics for the last 5 years. But before that, I worked in marketing and sales, mainly globally for large drinks companies in the main. And I'm really interested in T-shaped people because I guess partially because I would consider myself one, but I think there's a lot of benefit for HR people I work with to be able to connect, understand, and really get into the worlds of other parts of the business. I think they can build credibility, have more influence, deliver their projects better. So we'll get into talking about that soon.
Excellent. Thank you, Owen. And I'm Natal Dank. I head up the learning, coaching and consultancy at PXO Culture. And I am known as the co-author, of course, of Agile HR, a great book if you haven't read it and got your copy yet. So we specialize in helping HR teams and leaders embrace the Agile mindset and start to understand how to build people practices that enable business agility across their organization. We work very hands-on with teams, both in how to kind of understand the concepts and also sort of make this happen in the workplace, so that the real how-to is what we specialize in. So you can come over to PXO Culture at any time. We have a lot of resources on the website. We do some great videos and blogs. And some of you would know from some of the videos I do with Tom Hark, and I'll mention a bit more on that soon. But if you're not linked up with myself or Owen yet, please connect with us on LinkedIn. We always love to chat about anything to do with business agility and modern HR practices. So do get in touch at any time. And just going on from that, some of you might be familiar with the HR Trend Institute, who has been founded and led by the fantastic Tom Hark for a number of years. And I've been working with Tom for a little while around a video series that was very popular called Talking HR Trends with Natal and Tom. And he recently asked myself and my partner to take on the HR Trend Institute. So do go over there, check it out. And my partner will PXO Support will put the link into chat now. And over the next sort of few weeks, we'll really start to get some more content out about the latest trends and what to be on top of and what's going to influence your people strategy. And one more shout out before we get into the topic is our next meetup in 1 month's time is on design thinking. And this is a topic that's very close to Owen and my heart. We both have done a lot of design thinking projects and case studies. And we really find that this is one of the easiest areas for HR to begin their agile journey, but also one of the most important areas. And if you're not doing anything else in terms of agile ways of working, doing some design thinking to really enrich your products and services and make sure you've got the voice of the customer coming through your designs, this is exactly where you need to start. So do join us next month if you can, exploring and sort of a good introduction to design thinking for HR. So what we're going to do today we're going to start off with an exploration of how the world is changing, and particularly the business world, and what does that mean for the capabilities that we have in the HR profession. And, if you're part of this profession for a while, you know that all the top HR bodies are all debating this. What is the capabilities that a HR professional needs in a modern workplace, and how do you go about doing this? And I was just looking at Josh Bersin, and there's a whole piece around that the more successful a company is can be linked directly to a better capable HR team. So there's a real kind of business kind of imperative around how we develop our skills, but also for our own selves about how do we really enrich our career in our profession. So we want to explore that, and we want to get you thinking, okay, where am I at with my own capabilities? What does that look like? And then we're going to go into a few activities where you'll have time to do some silent brainstorming and actually think about your own T-shape. So we're going to explain the concept. You'll have a go at thinking about how that relates to your career and your job role at the time, at this moment. And of course, let us know your questions. So fire any questions to us at any time. We'll also pick questions up towards the end as well. So just let us know your questions and we'll pick them up in chat as we go.
Yeah, questions on the chat, exactly.
Questions on the chat, exactly. Yeah. And by the way, we will ask for your insights in chat. So do get ready to share your comments. We love to know what you're thinking about the discussion that we're having. Okay, so a big theme and why we're here is our changing kind of working paradigm. And some of you would have heard me talk about this before, that leading into the pandemic, we were already seeing these huge trends starting to reshape the workplace. So this is this shift away from a more hierarchical, bureaucratic structure of organizations towards the network. How do we collaborate more at a team level? How do we innovate faster? How do we deliver value through to our end customer at a faster rate? So these were all trends starting to reshape how we work. And more we were leaning towards agile ways of working as methods to find some answers to these complex problems that we have. So you were starting to see teams start to use things like design thinking, like prototype and testing, and definitely much more emphasis on end-to-end value chain and delivery in a business. So this was all taking place, and then the pandemic hit and it just accelerated all these trends overnight. And what's been particularly interesting is the acceleration around hybrid digital working. We thought this was going to take another kind of 8 to 10 years, and then it happened within sort of 1 year. And now the future of work is happening right now. So what does this look like? But what's sort of come out of this is that actually there's a whole new kind of skills capability kind of framework that a HR professional needs. And this is we're needing to deliver in new ways, and we're needing to also structure our team and develop our team in new ways to meet some of these complex problems. And so what we're looking at today is that if you want to play a part in enabling business agility, then we ourselves need to develop our capabilities in new ways. And this is definitely not letting go of the experience that you bring to the table today from your years in HR, but it's about modernizing that and adding a few things to the mix to ensure that you're a more, what we call a full stack HR professional. And we'll explain that concept quite soon. But what we're finding is there's this real kind of call for you to not just be a specialist in one functional topic area and not just be a generalist. There's more and more of a call for you to be both. And that's kind of can be quite scary, but also very exciting. And there's this need to be able to work across multiple business scenarios and, of course, work in multi-skilled teams. And this is about delivering that more holistic end-to-end employee experience. So this is what we're finding, and this is why we wanted to have this discussion today. But we'd really like to know what your thoughts are. I'm going to hand over to Owen to lead this discussion.
So what we want you to do is just take a couple of minutes to actually reflect on think of your specific situation right now, and maybe look back in the last 3, 6 months or a year and say, what are you being asked for potentially as an individual or within your team? Or what are they, when so if you're a HRBP, for example, or if you're in a center of excellence, when people actually come and say, we need more support in this area, we need training for this, we have a capability gap around that, what kind of skills and behaviors are you actually being asked for? So is it different potentially to a couple of years ago? Are you being asked? So I won't give you an example because I don't want to lead you, but just think when, or even you might say, actually, you might have been asked for something and thought, oh, we don't currently have that in our HR team. We might need to go externally, or actually, maybe we need to go and ask the digital guys for support with that. So we just want to see what kind of new skills and behaviors you're getting asked for, or you see in your organization that are in demand.
Yeah. So people data analytics. This makes me think, Natal, of Sky. Actually, they Sky Learning and Development team really changed how they worked starting a number of years ago, and they actually have a dedicated people analytics. I think that's getting more common. Definitely. What else are you picking up? Wow, too many to see. And digital skills generally, I think we see that particularly in L&D, right? When you're trying to, the expectation is on-demand resources rather than courses, right? So that's typically served digitally. And I think it goes beyond, I'm just going to check and see, but I think I'll be interested to maybe have this discussion. It goes beyond just developing the content, but it's also how do you serve those resources out there, give them at the point of need, generate demand for them. So you need to have those comm skills, I think, as well, and digital understanding. So I guess that's digital innovation and HR processes. That's a good description.
Yeah. There's some really nice call outs. So leading on from that. So one, Luke just said, moving quickly between data analyst and facilitator, which I think is really interesting. And then we also had a human-centered design, qualitative research, empathy building. But I really like one from Alex that solve my problems, not your HR problems. I think that's fantastic.
That's a great lead in as well for us. Yeah definitely.
Yeah. And also, it's not just solve my problems, solve my business problems, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's really good. Exactly. It's like, I've got issues that are holding back us as a business. Help me solve them, not from your HR perspective. Yeah. But I like your point about data into facilitator, empathy, qualitative. So yes, you have to have the analytics and be able to understand the numbers and read those and access them, et cetera, from your employee surveys. But then you also need to be able to drill down, and that happens in a much more empathic one-on-one potential way, right? When you're having interviews, et cetera, and trying to really get under, okay, so you said this, but what's really going on? How do I really understand the problem you're having?
Yeah, definitely. So a really interesting call out as well around the emphasis on collaboration and teamwork and coaching. So there's a real kind of across lots of different comments that it's not just about individual performance. There's about building high-performing teams, that kind of organizational kind of approach across your business, and definitely coaching skills. Yeah.
And I'm going to give a shout out to commercial acumen and understanding as well, because I think that's key. Back to my initial point about if you want to build credibility and have a voice, particularly in certain parts and at the top of an organization, I think you need to understand what the key value drivers are and be able to speak that language. So if you're working in a for-profit environment, you need to know how money gets made in that business and how easily it can be lost. So what are the key drivers? So if you're in if you're in consumer goods, supply chain cost is a key one right now. If you're in banking, it might be more about worries about regulation or changes, for example.
Excellent. So that takes us on to the capabilities meeting your organization. Tell us a bit more about that, Owen.
Yeah. So here we're actually looking and saying, how do these match? So all these things you've identified, these are ones that you're being asked for potentially, or that you actually have. Are they meeting how do they align to what your organization needs now? I think the big change here is that before we felt like these needs were they were clearer, I would say. I think it's a bit more ambiguous now because it's changing. So I think the problems we're solving, or we were solving before, we knew we could pretty much map the capabilities we needed versus what the organization needed. And I think now that the organizations are evolving and how we work in HR is evolving, how do they match up? So I guess I'd actually, if people want to pop that on chat, if they have thoughts on it, I'd be interested, because I think you've picked up quite a few. We picked up digital skills, for example, analytics. I think the ability to deal with different groups across the organization and teams. But we see. I guess it varies by organization. Is it a disconnect? But certainly we see it's changing, and I think some organizations are able to flex like that, but a lot are struggling. I would say bureaucratically. And even what organizations that I would consider very good in their field and very good generally at say HR and L&D, sometimes are struggling to reorient to get these new capabilities.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is also intriguing to think about for your own career development. What is beneficial for your own career and how you keep kind of increasing your capability and improving your capability as a HR professional, but also what's needed in your context right now. And because for example, if your organization is embracing a big digital transformation and you don't feel really quite capable in that space, quite quickly you do need to build that capability and at least have a decent understanding of of how you work in a digital way, what kind of tools are before you, and also how you help others. Because actually that's going to help your organization accelerate in that change. So it's also good to think about, what does your organization need? How do I help them transform? And also, what opportunity does that give me? Because there's this great opportunity of learning new things that also is going to help whatever transformation is taking place in your organization, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah. And I think often we have been conditioned and rewarded to be real specialists, right? To be really good at a certain topic and to say, we know this really well. Okay, and we can stand up confidently and say, I know this really well. I think now that it's changing, we're having to learn new skills, maybe quite quickly. It can be harder to expose ourselves like that. So I think be aware that you don't have to be a deep expert in something to try it, especially in one of the good things about Agile is you can frame things as experiments. You can frame, I'm not a total expert on this, but we're going to try it in this relatively low risk way, for example. So we would encourage you to do that, because certainly it really drives learning. And I guess that leads on nicely to this point, is that I think there is, this idea of career ladders is definitely, there's certainly a lot less of them. I think I've heard senior people within consultancies like EY, for example, is saying that their pyramid structure, where it was really linear, and you go in as an associate consultant, senior manager, etc. They're saying they're really moving away from that, and they're actually just trying to say, what is right? What do you need right now? What skills do you want to develop, and how can you best do that? So see it as much more of actually, there's a nice podcast called Squiggly Careers. You've probably heard of it, Natal. And I think see it as that. See it as a bit more of there's lots of different ways you can pick up different skills and think up, down, sideways. You may have to go back and have another go at something. I'll give you one example. I have lived in different countries, but I'd never worked in a global role before. I didn't actually go looking for one, but I ended up in one, and it really suited me. Now, if you had said to me, actually, here's a global role, I probably would have gone, I don't know if I want all that travel, etc. But when it was handed to me, I took it and got lots of different skills, and it took me in a totally different direction. in terms of capability, because I ended up doing capability work with teams in a different country. So I think if you can be open to these things, it can really help develop your career like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that ultimately that sort of 5-year career plan of, what exact role am I going to be in next, and what's the job description that relates to it, and what's the qualification I need to do to get there is really I don't know if it actually ever really existed, but that kind of approach to career development, I think, is over. And that can be a little bit scary for people because it feels a bit more uncertain. However, if you embrace this concept of iteration, and particularly breaking things down into smaller pieces of development, which is that agile mindset, it really can be much more dynamic and progressive. And in particular, I'm sure you've all had opportunities that have come along that you weren't expecting, but when they came along, they were really exciting. And if you were in a great position to take it at that time, so you've actually been developing different skills, and you're like, yeah, I think I can take that opportunity that's just come out, which might be a different kind of project. It might be a side hustle. It could be a new role. Then this is actually a great way to sort of develop your career going forward. So, and we've got a nice comment here, Owen.
Yeah, from Andy. Yeah, I was looking at that
Andy.
actually. Yeah. And I think he's quite right, Andy. I think, in marketing, we used to call it eating your own dog food, which is not a particularly delightful expression, but it's basically the idea is that you need to actually experience whatever you're asking your user. In this case, they were making marketing dog food to do. So you need to know it. So I think you're quite right. We need to really actually put ourselves out there and do it. Because if we're talking about the learning organization and being open to these things, actions speak a lot louder than words. The other thing I'd say on this actually is, Natal, I don't think we've talked about this concept. You might know it, Natal. Reid Hoffman, the guy behind one of the main LinkedIn guy, he wrote a book called The Alliance with another guy, and it's all about this idea of tour of duties. That's one of the things, and it's this idea that actually each project or role you do is effectively like a tour of duty. And each time you're trying to get that bit of experience, but you're not seeing it as this is the rest of my life in this role. Rather, you're seeing it as this tour of duty, this particular project or role is right for me right now. And in a year or two, I'll see, and then I'll renegotiate with the organization, with the client, or I'll move on to something else. But you're building this collection of experiences which build you as a professional.
Excellent. We're going to keep going. We've had a great question around pay progression linked to this conversation. I might just hold on to that and pick it up after we do a bit more on the T-shape, because there's sort of several different ways to attack that question. So thanks, Audrey. I will definitely come back to that question. Okay, so we're going to get into this idea of the T-shape. Now, for anyone that's familiar with Agile, this is a way of developing teams in particular that you can also start to take into your own career framework. And what I was saying earlier is that it's actually been really useful, particularly for HR professionals, because it's helped us move beyond this idea of the specialist versus generalist. So what is the T-shape? The T-shape is ultimately this, and that's made up of two components. The first is the vertical of you can have a deep specialism, and you might have several specialisms, but that's where you can go very deep in certain topics. Now, traditionally in HR, that's often been very functionally related. So you might be able to go very deep on reward, or you might be go very deep on learning and development. So what's your deep expertise? What do you bring to your career in that way? Then the horizontal is the generalist. And this is starting to think about, well, what's the general capabilities that I have that I've picked up as I've developed my career, but also how I move across different business scenarios. Now, a generalist is sort of often known as the jack of all trades. They can kind of touch into every topic, but not go deep. So the idea is, if we put the two of them together, it's a more robust way of looking at your capability landscape. And that is the T-shape. This is the full stack. So what is the deep specialism that you have, and how do you complement that with a group of general capabilities. So, for example, the ability to move across different scenarios, such as I'm fairly digitally savvy, but I wouldn't call myself a specialist. I've got good knowledge of the employee experience, but I go deep on reward. So this is this idea of how can you move across different business scenarios based on that general capability, and then add that deep specialism when needed. So this concept came out of there's some debate about who first coined the concept. Someone from McKinsey's, then Spotify have done a lot around this. But ultimately, it's really developed to think about how do you start to build a really strong team where there's people complementing each other with their T-shape. And it means that your team can essentially take on any business scenario because you've got that depth, both in the general capability and the specialisms. So to bring that to life for you, let's have work through a bit of an example. So if I think about my own career, and I was thinking about where I was several years ago when I was developing as a HR professional. And I had this kind of cluster of skills and capabilities. And it did reflect very much that I came through more what was known as that specialist kind of avenue of HR development. So I did work in learning and development and talent development and sort of much more in that kind of cultural, organizational development area. So I picked up a bit of change management. Definitely, I did a lot around, employee engagement and engagement surveys. And I did a lot of facilitation and coaching because I was L&D. I was known as quite good at consulting, but I was always kind of going through others because I was the center of expertise. So there was this idea that I had my kind of capabilities, but often I had to deliver through other people because of the model of HR. And then, of course, I had that talent learning and development. And at the time, it was always based on what role that I was doing. So, was I an L&D professional? Was I the head of talent or something like that? So I would sort of be building these capabilities in line with that. If I then take that into the T-shaped concept, this is where I would say that I'm more these days. So this is a reflection of where my T would be at the moment. And as is clearly pointed out, still very much evolving. But if I think about my general capability, if you remember, that was the horizontal part of the T. Definitely, this strong know your customer. So how do I understand the people in my organization? How do I go deep with the business? How do I kind of understand what the business is doing? I'm good at digital tools. I'm definitely not the expert, but I can hold my own. And I do a lot around diversity, equity, inclusion. Again, don't see myself as an expert, but I've got a good understanding of that area. I can dabble in the people analytics and definitely use it as I need. I do a lot around employee experience and, of course, agile organizational design. Where I feel like I can go deep these days is, of course, agile HR, but also what I've brought to my career up until now, which is around that people strategy and that functional expertise. So this is where you might actually have some specialisms that reflects just what you've done up until now in your own career. And then definitely I've got, I feel like I've really built my expertise around that human-centered product and service design. And of course, that coaching facilitation keeps going from that kind of history of where I've come from for learning and development. So this is where this is an example of where I'm at with my T-shape. And we'd like you to start thinking about, well, where would you be at this point in time? And then we're going to go into a discussion around what are the different capabilities that we're thinking a modern HR professional could now start to add to their T, and also how can you go about that? So just to get us to that stage, we'd like you to think about your own T-shape. And to do this, we do have a handout that you can use. And I'll just ask PXO support to pop that into chat so you can download that directly from our website. And to get you kind of thinking along those lines, what we'd like you to think about is what would you be putting into that general capability? So what would be your more general capabilities that you've either picked up from working in different industries, different kind of job roles, and also your HR career? This is where things might come from other types of jobs that you've had in the past. So for example, Owen comes from a marketing background. he would definitely have some marketing in his general capabilities and maybe even his specialisms because of that different kind of background.
And then the project work might be as well informed. So I'm a long way from an expert on, say, supply chain or key account sales or so many things, but I can hold my own on those, right? Because I've dealt with, or manufacturing. I can have a meaningful conversation with the guy who's running a packaging line for consumer goods, right? Yeah. Which, when that's definitely in that, but I'd be a long way from the intricacies of lean manufacturing,
Correct. Yes.
Or Six Sigma.
So in chat is a link where you can go to a PDF that we've put on our website and you can download to use now and also later on. So pop over to that link. What we're going to do is I'd like you to all jump to page 6, because that's where you can actually do a T-shape for yourself. And so the questions that we'd like you to consider now as you do your T-shape is identify one capability that you have already that is a general capability. So what do you think sits in your horizontal? What would you put up there? And then can you identify a deep specialism that you have? So what would be something that you feel that you've really kind of can go deep in and is a real core strength of yours that you bring to different HR teams and scenarios? And then have a first thought about what you'd like to develop next, and really like you to think about what would be a general capability that you think you need to develop to strengthen your career, but also possibly what is needed in your organization at the moment. So what do you need to add to that T in the general area to really strengthen it? So have a think about that, and love to hear from any of you that's happy to share your examples. So an example on the screen is a general capability of evidence-based, specialism, agile HR, and then something to develop is hybrid workplace design. And we've just had one from Christina. Thank you so much, Christina, for sharing. We've got general, agile ways of working, specialism, employee experience, and in particular, using human-centered design to co-create experiences. And Christina is focusing on developing virtual facilitation practices. That's a really great example. Excellent. So have a think. What would be a general capability in your horizontal? What would be a specialism that you would put in your vertical? And then if you were to consider one that you'd like to develop next in that general capability, what might that be? And as I said, if you're happy to share, we'd love to see some examples. Excellent. So while you're doing that, you might be thinking, well, what are the type of capabilities that I could develop, and what would be important to start adding to the T-shape? And you will have some capability kind of competency frameworks and capability maps that you're using internally, and also that you'll kind of be reflecting on across different HR bodies. And what we've done is we've pulled out the really key ones for business agility and definitely kind of a modern approach to human resources. And they're up on the screen now. So as you can see, that relates to a lot of what people were saying at the start of the session. So you've got digital savvy, which was a key call out that people were saying at the start. So technical skills, being able to work in a more digital way. We've got being more evidence-based and data-driven. So using analytics and metrics and information to inform your role, but also to help the business. And then we've got things like agile ways of working, which we've seen some call-outs for, and also employee experience and journey mapping. So these are sort of some capabilities that we're seeing in demand and definitely quite important to be adding to your T-shape or strengthening in your T-shape at the moment.
We're seeing more people coming in and saying similar, this team facilitation and coaching in a digital environment. To be expected, right? And I think it's quite different. I think it's certainly Natal was a bit of a pioneer on this. I think early on you were doing more digital work and more virtual work, but I think it takes quite a bit of work to really get familiar with how to get the most out of it. And tools play a big part. Natal's been using Miro very well for a year or two, along with an old colleague of ours, Tracy Waters from Sky, who ex-Sky. It's only in the last sort of couple of months that I've really started getting most out of it. And I think you need to be very comfortable with these tools yourself before you can use them confidently with a team, or at least a degree of comfort, right? Or else they learn with you. But it certainly is. I find it easier if I feel like I've got a general handle on it. You know?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So we've got some other examples here. We've got general data analytics, deep specialism, capability building, fantastic relation to the topic today, Rose. And then general to develop is data analytics. So wanting to strengthen the analytics component there. Veronica is as you were saying, coaching, specialism, talent acquisition, and general to develop team facilitation and coaching and digital environment. And then we've got another person, general is employee experience and journey mapping, specialism, emotional intelligence, agile ways of working. Excellent, nice combinations. And then we've got another example, general consulting skills, a specialism, organizational design, and general to develop is multi-organizational collaboration. So again, this side, we're seeing lots of modern kind of needs coming through in what to develop next.
Yeah,
so
I think that's also relevant, right? In terms of thinking about partnerships, increasingly companies realize that they can't tackle a big problem on their own. So they're like, okay, how can we partner with somebody else? How can we do a longer term collaboration with another group of externals that can actually help us deliver on our objectives?
Definitely. So we've got some examples on the screen. If anyone wants to know any more information about any of them, I'll just focus on one, and then we're going to go into just talking about how you can strengthen your T-shape. And then, but do let us know if you've got any questions you want us to start picking up. One of them on the screen now is ESG, so environment, social, and corporate governance. So this is a key trend that we're seeing coming into that's going to truly transform organizations, and that's around the need to go net zero. A lot of your organizations have now declared net zero targets and pledges, and this does equal a change not just in how we do operations, but definitely the skill set of our people and mindset. And so understanding how this feeds into the people strategy, understanding how it feeds into L&D strategy. I saw just the other week, LinkedIn have actually launched a whole new section of LinkedIn Learning around green skills, which demonstrates just how kind of significant this is. So that's a good example of a capability that a lot of us probably don't have consider very strong in our T-shape at the moment, and is something that's really going to come in and start influencing a lot of our organizations. If anyone wants to know anything else about anything on the screen, do let us know. So let's have a bit of a chat, Owen, around how to develop a T, because I think that's always a key question. And also the concept of why. So what's your thoughts on T-shaped people in T-shaped teams? Why is this something, and why is this important for HR in particular to think about?
I guess it goes back to this. I get the start point, right? We're saying at the very beginning, you were saying how we're shifting as organizations from silos and hierarchies into a much more networked group of teams. And I think I guess we firmly believe that the team is the unit of delivery, right? You know, if you have a team of, say, 5 or maybe up to 10 people, that's a great unit that can actually get stuff done. But it can only get stuff done if it has the right people within the team. Because if you have to then rely on other individuals who are outside of the team within your organization, you get into handoffs, things slow down, you lose momentum. So getting that autonomous team requires that you have as many of the right skills as you can within it. You won't ever be able to have 100%, but you want to be able to cover off the main ones. So this is where you want to make sure that, my view on this, Natal, we haven't discussed this in detail, is that you want to have a fair few of the general bits that everyone can talk to each other and understand the world. So even if I'm a real data analytics kind of like, for want of a better term, geek, right? But who's really hot on the data, whereas I'm a facilitator more into coaching and leadership, we want to be able to have a conversation where we can appreciate each other's worlds and have a shared language. So I think that there's needs to be some common threads in the T's, but then you've got all your key specialisms covered on the vertical parts of the T.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly. Yeah. And this is what a lot of HR leaders are now looking at, because if you're building a multi-skilled team that can run, for example, your HR projects or solution design for your whole department, then what are the specialisms that you need that could be across several people? But then what are the general capabilities that everyone needs in that team? So everyone needs some level of data analytics. Everyone needs some level of being digitally savvy. But then you've got people that can go deep on those topics. And you're starting to see that the people that are the specialists of those topics can train and upskill others so they can actually start to strengthen their capabilities in that area. So it's helping you think about, because in the past, when we've brought project teams together, we've often thought, okay, well, we need a reward person, we need a talent person, we need a learning person, we maybe need someone from marketing and comms. And we've thought more job roles rather than just skills and capabilities. So this is starting to think about, well, who are the people that can represent some of those skills? And also, how can they be developing their T so we're not always reliant on bringing someone from elsewhere in the organization into the team?
Or external, or having to pay for external, right? You can build it. Yeah, definitely. And I think it also builds on the idea that the team gets more and more autonomous rather than less so, right? So you're reducing reliance.
So Kate, you've got a great question of, when assessing capabilities within HR, could the T-shaped self-reflection exercise help when addressing capability gaps? Not sure how it would work, if indeed it can. So it definitely can. And so what some HR teams are doing that's been really successful is using the T as, first of all, people reflect on what their own T looks like. So then they kind of fill that template in, and then they go and actually get feedback from people that they work with on that T. So do people agree with that? Do they see those capabilities? Is there a certain one that they've put on there that people would question, or is there something missing? So going getting data on your own T through that feedback mechanism is really, really strong. And then depending on what you've already got internally, and so I know a lot of teams already have some internal capability frameworks, or you can use the one that we've shared today around modern HR skills, and then talking about what does that person need next. So what is important in the role that they're playing at the moment, or the team that they're contributing to? And also, how does that meet their motivation? So some of this is, how can you actually start to blend in with job crafting itself, what people are kind of motivated to do. So definitely it is a really strong framework to use, and people are actually out there using it now and finding that it gives people a sense of ownership as well as a more dynamic way of developing their capabilities.
There's a sweet spot, isn't there, basically between what you need as an individual, what your team needs, and what your organization needs, right?
Exactly.
And if you can get in that, you'll feel better about it. You'll be more motivated. Your team and organization will be successful.
So let's have a look at this. And sure enough, it actually relates very much to agile ways of working. So gone are the days of the 5-year career plan. I'm sorry, but let's just rip that up and throw that in the bin. And let's think of a much more dynamic way of how to develop that T. So the first one is build your career development backlog. So I'm not sure if people on the call already work with backlogs. I'm pretty sure a lot of you do, and Kanban boards, but you may not have thought of doing this for your actual career development. And it works really, really well, because what a backlog is all about is taking a big complex topic like learning a whole new skill and breaking it down into small achievable chunks or actions that you can do to develop that skill over time. So for example, if you are thinking of even learning a whole new qualification, how do you break that down into small pieces that fit into the qualification, different topics areas, maybe even different assignments and projects that you need to do, and see that much more as an incremental way of developing that skill.
And maybe as well, maybe you're not sure. You often aren't, right? So you'll actually have a little task in there, which is try this out. Basically, could I? The first thing might be go and have a conversation with the internal comms person I know, to talk about how I improve my written comms skills for content, right? Or and
Exactly.
So I think it's the nice thing is you can experiment a little bit. And actually, there's a lovely book by a business school professor called, her name is Hermina, I can put it on the chat, Hermina Ibarra, and it's called Working Identity. And she talks about how people often, when they're in a big career move, they kind of go in, they kind of try a little bit, then they kind of go back out again. And there's often not quite a full start, right? But you're kind of maybe building up these skills. And then, so actually, again, my example, so I was working in marketing, right up until 2015, but in 2007, I qualified as a business coach, and I was doing that a little bit on the side, some generally not paid. But it took until 2015 before I really made the move into HR learning and all that space, right? So I effectively was kind of dipping in partially, but not quite committing, and then eventually I was ready. So.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. And the great thing about having a backlog is, of course, the columns of to do, doing, done. So first of all, what's in the doing column? Because you can't overcommit. So I don't know if you're like me, I buy lots of books that I'm going to read, and I never find the time to read them, or I start them and then I don't finish them. So that's, yeah, same, Christina. So that's something that if I've got, 8 things in my doing column, I've gone over my work in progress limit, and it's not going to get done. Also, you can have a few things that you're going to do next. So, for example, find a mentor, or maybe you're going to complete some LinkedIn learning. But like Agile, if an opportunity comes up for you to maybe join a new project or go into a different part of the organization, you might rearrange that backlog and think, no, actually, this is the most important thing to do next, and I'm going to bring that forward. So it's a much more dynamic way of how to prioritize your time. Also, think about definition of done. So what does it mean to put something into that done column? And when we're learning, often that means that you can explain it to somebody else. Maybe you can facilitate a session on it, or maybe you can train somebody else. So really think about what would be your definition of done for learning a skill. It's a really powerful way of learning. And so the next one is side hustles to create learning pathways. So Owen, when I say side hustles, what comes to mind for you?
So I think typically, right, in the certainly was uber trendy. It may not be as trendy as we come into a recession world of Silicon Valley. It was all about having side hustles where you made money and you're building it up so you would eventually float to unicorn business. Whereas I think what I'm thinking of here, and I think you are too, is more about what can we do on the side that just kind of builds our experience, that potentially might guide us towards a different area of just interest. I mean, you've got some nice examples of freelance work, volunteering, side gigs, etc. Going to meetups is a classic one, and speaking at meetups. The other thing I'd add here, I guess, is it might be learning a language. I mean, we kind of typically use English as a business language, but that might be your way into a different area or a different opening up a different route. And especially if it's something that gives you energy and you want to do, so you don't mind dedicating your free time to, I think it's a good one. I've got a friend who has really built his side gig into his main gig. He's actually really passionate about music, and he's built a music authority site where you can go and get lessons and learn about songs, about different themes, etc. So.
Excellent. And so this is all about your 70-20-10, which is a learning framework that's extremely popular. And 70% is that we learn on the job through direct experience. And so if you get involved in something directly, for example, volunteering, you actually learn through that. Then 20% is your social. So this is about talking to others, having a conversation about what you're learning. And only 10% comes from that classroom-based learning. Because as we all know, you can go and do some great learning session or training session, but it's not until you apply those skills and you talk to others about it that true kind of development takes place. So this helps you put that into action. And then finally is the embrace your own feedback loop. So we talked about this earlier. Go and get feedback on your T-shape. Ask your friends, your partners, mentors, managers. Go and look at online articles, reflect about your own capabilities compared to those, and definitely start to drive that continuous improvement link that is so important to agile thinking, but also to that learning agility that we're talking about today. So that is the 3 key steps to develop your T-shape. I'm just going to let you all pop your questions into chat now. We'll stay online and make sure they're all answered, because I know some of you will need to go at the end when the time is up. So what we're going to do is we're going to say a few words to wrap it up, and then we'll come back to any questions that you put in chat. I will just go to the question earlier about pay. How do you relate this to a pay conversation? Mm-hmm. And that is that on a couple of levels, is that, first of all, sort of moving beyond looking at roles linked to pay. So this is quite a few organizations are looking at how can you link pay, reward, more to levels of mastery. So how is someone actually, what level of capability are they at across a series of skills? And how does that reflect how they're being rewarded and paid? Some organizations are linking, of course, pay to outcomes and targets, which also is a way of how do you develop your skills towards achieving those outcomes and targets. So this also is about moving beyond, I suppose, the pay always linking into that kind of career move. So how do people become more kind of open to the idea that moving sideways, down, and as well as up actually is part of that career development? Now, if you're internal, that pay grade may change or may not, but actually more and more organizations are looking at how do you link that pay to skills itself rather than the whole kind of job role. So this is kind of this new area of how do we link reward beyond just the job function that you have in an organization. So, Owen, let's say a couple of words of thanks as everyone gets off to their next meeting and practices their digital facilitation. A couple of words from you, Owen, in terms of thank you.
I think just to wrap it up as well is one of the things we didn't talk about, I think the benefits of having this T-shape is that you may be in a large corporate now, and you may in the future stay in a large corporate. But I think the smaller the business you are, and especially if you're working for yourself or in a small team, you will need to have all these, to be better at these kind of more generative skills. So the more you develop your T-shape and get that curiosity going whether it's within an large organization, the more flexibility it gives you and opportunities you can have further on in your career, right? So you'll be more comfortable about going into other, say, not-for-profit or a smaller business or a more multinational business. So it gives you more options, which allows you to grow. So that would be my last plea for T-shape. I'm a fan.
Makes you more employable, which is what this is all about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So make sure we see you next month for design thinking. So we're going to help you put that into action. And of course, do keep in touch if you're not part of our newsletter group already. So come over to this link, make sure you're signed up. You'll get all the latest information on all the meetups that we're doing and all the great goodies that we put out there for people for free. And of course, you can reply to us at any time to have a chat about developing your own team, your own T-shape, and your the capability across your department.
Very nice to see lots of people already. Thank you for all your kind comments, and very good to see you're all getting on it already.
Yeah, definitely. So have fun with your development backlog. And it was great to have you join us today. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
and I hope the person in Australia gets to bed soon.
Yeah, thanks for staying up. Big, special thanks. I hope it was worth it.